Hello, everyone, and welcome to week 11. This week is going to be a bit of a long one. We're going to be talking about capitalism, colonialism, and sex work. Let's start by talking about work. Work is very broadly any activity that takes time and produces something of value. That obviously includes paid work in the marketplace, what we normally think of as a job. It also includes things like caring for your own children, housework, emotional work that you do supporting your friends or family. In general, work that helps your family out is definitely work. Think about the work you do for school, creative work, doing, hobbies or artistic pursuits, all counts as work. We have lots of different reasons for doing work. Some of it we enjoy, find satisfying. Some of it, provides meaning to our life. Some of it is just necessary, the kind of maintenance that you do to keep your body working, going to the gym, staying fit, whatever. That's all work, right? But you need to do it. Some of it keeps our lives in order. You've got to do the dishes. But ultimately, the reason that we get jobs is that we need that money to live in order to get access to basically anything in our society: food, shelter, clothing, and so forth, healthcare. You need money, and the only way you can get money is by getting a job. There is another way. We'll talk about that later. So I want you to stop for a moment and think about how you feel about work, and think about the question of whether work is voluntary. Is this something that you're forced to do? Do you have a choice whether to get a job or not? Obviously, you have a choice between jobs to some extent, but you have a choice just not to work at all. And in what sense is that choice meaningful, given the things that you need? And then the last thing to say about work here is to think about some of the ways that work often involves a degree of sexual objectification, especially for women. This is something we'd have a class discussion about, but a very common experience that a lot of young women especially have had is doing service work, working as wait staff in restaurants or coffee shops or whatever as baristas, and that often involves having people flirt with them, having their bodies looked at, having people make comments and so forth. And what people find is that if they play into that to some extent, they get more tips, they're more likely to get better jobs and so forth. And so to some degree, objectification is required by a significant number of jobs. Okay, so we're going to talk about capitalism. Capitalism is an economic system, the one that we mostly live in. Capitalism is defined as a system where the things that you need to make products for sale, known as the means of production, are owned privately and used for profit. So when you need to make something for whatever it is that you would sell in the marketplace, a commodity, you need a bunch of things to do that, right? You need a factory maybe to produce it. You need the raw materials. You need the intellectual property, the ideas, the rights to do it. And all of those things in a capitalist economy are owned privately by individuals. That's what defines capitalism. When we talk about capitalism, we talk a lot about the market. Markets exist outside of capitalism as well, but they definitely are an important part of capitalism. And you'll often hear people talk about the free market. But one thing I'd like you to consider is whether it is possible to have capitalism that is truly free, because ultimately capitalism does require governments. It does require enforcement. At the very least, capitalism requires property laws, right? I cannot own something and therefore sell it to you unless I can define that as mine and in some way protect it from you just picking it up and walking away with it, right? And for that, I need laws about property. I need laws against theft. I need, the police to exist, right? So capitalism results from a society that creates it. It's not natural. It is socially constructed. And you'll remember one of the signs that something is socially constructed is that it changes over time. And indeed, capitalism is relatively new. It shows up in human society around about the 1750s, the 18th century, depending on how you count. But it's really only, maybe 300 years old. And for the vast majority of human existence, capitalism has not existed. Of course, it didn't exist everywhere in the world and still doesn't. Cuba doesn't have a capitalist society, for example. So, it's important to remember it's not inevitable. It's not the only choice. It is something that we've constructed as a society and that might likely change over time. So we're going to talk about the Marxist critique or criticism of capitalism some more today. Marx is an incredibly complicated thinker who wrote huge books, and since he wrote them 150 years ago, there's been a huge amount of thought about them, responses to them, so I'm going to give you a very brief overview here. There's a lot of good criticisms of Marx. I'm going to give you a simplified version, and you'll find out there lots of critiques, some of them good, some of them bad, of his ideas, but I just want to present the ideas here in their kind of simplest form and present them without too much criticism, just so you can understand them, and then you can go on and do some of the thought about how valid they are. So he claims that under capitalism you had classes. In particular, you had the capitalist class, those are people who own the means of production, and you have the workers, those are people who do not. And he argued that fundamental to capitalism was a transfer of wealth, of value from the workers, the people who didn't own anything except themselves and their own labor, to the people who owned the means of production through the mechanism of surplus labor, which I'll talk about in a moment. He argued that the state was necessary to enforce this, that the military and the police are actually a really important part of capitalism. They, often stay hidden, but ultimately if, people try and rise up and take back control of the means of production, the police and the military are there to crush them and keep them in line. And then he argued two other criticisms of capitalism. One is alienation, one is about inflation. I'll go into those in more detail in a moment. So what's this idea of surplus labor? So he claims there's two classes of people. There's people who own capital, who own the means of production, and they have the power to employ other people. And then there are people who do not own any capital, and so the only way people who don't own capital have to get money to live is to sell their labor in the marketplace, which is another way of saying get a job. So let's imagine a very simplified version of this. Let's say I'm a capitalist and I'm planning to sell tables. I'm going to sell a completed table ready for the market for $600. That's its retail price. And going into this table is $100 of material. Now that's the means of production. That's the wood, that's the workshop, the tools, the factory, the store to sell it in, the supply chain, all of that stuff. And as I said, that's owned privately. I have wealth to begin with. I'm a capitalist, and so I have control over those things. But I can't magically turn $100 worth of means of production into a table. Instead, what I need is someone to do some work on it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hire someone, a carpenter, to do that work, to turn those materials into that table. And Marx would say, well, if you had $100 of materials and then you produced a $600 table, that means that those workers did $500 worth of work. They increased the value of the materials by $500 such that the table could be sold for $600. But as the capitalist, as the person who owns those means of production, who's able to employ these people, I'm not going to pay them $500 per table, right? If I did, I wouldn't make any profit. And if I wasn't making any profit, why would I be doing this in the first place, right? Why would I be trying to make tables? What I want to do here is turn my initial capital of $100 of materials into something that is more valuable, i.e. more capital, so I can expand my business, I can become richer. And so I'm going to pay my workers less for their work than they created in value. So let's say that I pay them $300. That means that I have created, or they have created, $200 of additional labor that they're not getting paid for, additional value, and that value goes to me. That's my profit. And the reason I get this profit is because I owned the means of production to begin with as the capitalist. So the workers end up doing work that is effectively unpaid, and instead I get that pay. And the only reason I got that pay is because of my ownership of the means of production. And Marx claims that this is fundamentally exploitational. What this is doing is turning the work of laborers into profit for the capitalists, into value for the capitalists. Now, obviously, this is a very simplified example. There's a lot more going on here, but just to give you the basic sense of what surplus labor means, it's that fundamentally, when you get a job, you're not getting paid what you're worth, right? You're getting paid less than you're worth, and you have to be paid less than you're worth because otherwise the person who is employing you wouldn't be making money. Another important thing to notice here is that Marx is not saying that this is because the employer is greedy or mean. This is something that you just have to do if you're in business. So the solution to this problem is not for employers to be more generous, right? I might be very generous in the amount that I pay my workers, but I can't pay them 100% of their value because otherwise I just wouldn't have a business, right? So his claim is not that the problem with capitalism is that capitalists are greedy. His claim is the problem is the structure of capitalism forces capitalists to exploit their workers in this way, that's the only choice they have. And if a capitalist chooses not to do this, right, if they choose to walk away, then someone else will. That's what the marketplace provides. So what capitalism ends up doing is valuing people differently. And this happens in a number of different ways. We have incredible inequality in America. And we think of rich people often as more valuable than poor people. We think of poor people, if you look at polls, people think of poor people as lazy typically. They think of them as less intelligent, right? They think of rich people as being hardworking, as this being a good sign of their character. Right? We also have a lot of sexism and racism under capitalism. There's a significant pay gap, and you're going to watch a video after this from John Green on that topic. You're also going to watch a short video laying out just how unequal America is. And under capitalism, money is powerful. And in particular, this gives it political power. It warps our democracy. And again, the point that the Marxists would make here is there's nothing you can do about this. It's not that we, have laws that allow too much lobbying or something. The nature of money is that it's powerful. You can use it to buy goods and services, right? And so the political system will inevitably bend towards people with more money under capitalism because they just have more power. Related to this is the problem of the idea of meritocracy. Meritocracy is a system where the people who have more merit rise to the top, right? So the idea here is that in America, you can start from anything, right? No matter where you start, if you work hard, if you're smart, if you have a good idea, if you do well, you can rise to riches, right? And similarly, if you start well off, but you're a mess up your whole life, then you end up not having anything, and you sort of deserve it. And for a start, this isn't really true about America. First of all, there's a huge amount of luck in how well you do in life. But even more than that, the start you have in life is incredibly important, right? The ability to get an education, to get funded, to get support from your parents, to get loans from your parents, right? But because we believe in this idea of meritocracy, because we push it, the idea that people that do well deserve to do well, we really add insult to injury here, right? Not only are rich people more powerful because they have more money and money is useful, they also are seen as having more merit, as being better people, as being smarter, more hardworking. Now, a lot of the work that people do that is very poorly paid is incredibly hard work, right? Being a janitor or a roofer or, all kinds of jobs are very physically difficult, a coal miner, right? But we don't pay them nearly as much by massive magnitudes as we pay CEOs. That's not to say that, rich people aren't hardworking. Many of them are. But it's not really the case that they're significantly more hardworking than many poor people. Single parents are incredibly hardworking, right? But they don't make billions of dollars as a result. And in particular, this is centered around which work we pay and which work we don't. I'm getting a very strong lesson in this right now because with isolation, my children are out of school and I'm doing childcare during the day. I'm teaching them and we're doing homeschooling. And I get paid more than the typical daycare worker does. I'm an adjunct professor, so I don't make much, but a typical professor, a full professor, makes significantly more, right? And if you think about it, as you go up the educational chain, you make more and more, right? So daycare workers make the least, elementary school teachers a little more, high school teachers a little more, college teachers a little more, and the most prestigious professors that only teach grad students and do research make the most, right? And that, to me, is just completely backwards from how hard the work is. I mean, I would much rather be teaching all of y'all who are, a bunch of adults who can, do things like manage their own business than a 4-year-old who is very, very difficult to teach and demands like constant attention and is just a huge amount of work. And in particular in our system, the majority of unpaid work, of work that we don't pay, so think about domestic work, right? Work in the home, childcare work, work for family, elder care and so forth, is done disproportionately by women. And so that has a very different effect on how people are valued. And it means that ultimately men have, on average, more power, right? Because if you have more money, that gives you more power. In a relationship, there's things you can do about this, but if one person has access to far more money than the other person, that's a power imbalance in a relationship, right? And because women are underpaid, even when a heterosexual couple, a man and woman married together, are doing the same job, it is likely that the woman on average will be paid less than the man, right? And will have less power. And obviously women who are not doing paid work at all but only doing work in the home are even more significantly disadvantaged. And in John Green's video, he's going to go into this in more depth. The next idea I want to talk about is alienation. What Marx says is that work is this incredibly meaningful thing to people. Human beings, according to Marx, love doing work. We love creating things. We love, achieving. We love getting things that we need to live. It's very satisfying to, grow food, to hunt, to produce art, to produce crafts, right? Anyone who's ever done like their own woodwork or sewing or, made any kind of thing that you use knows that this is very fulfilling. But he claims that one of the big problems with capitalism is instead of allowing us to do that work that is satisfying and meaningful to us, instead we're putting to this marketplace where the thing we have to work for is money, right? And so many of us have had a job where the thing that we care about is the paycheck. We don't get any satisfaction or very little satisfaction from the work itself, and we're just sitting there watching the clock. We wouldn't be doing this if we weren't getting paid for it, and we don't enjoy it at all. And he says this is really alienating from us. It takes us away from something that's fundamental as us about people. And then this also happens in the marketplace in the way that it separates us from each other. If you've ever gotten a gift from someone that they made for you, or bought something from someone that they made themselves, right? Maybe you've bought a work of art from someone that they made, right? You'll know that that's a satisfying relationship. It's really nice to get something. It feels good to get something from someone that they made for you. And that gives you both this connection. But for the vast majority of stuff in our life, we never see the people who make it. We never even think about them, right? The computer that I'm using right now to record this, an important part of that is coltan, which is a mineral that is mined in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Now, the person who mined that mineral, that's a really important part of their life, right? That's their job. It's incredibly hard work. They get paid very little for it, but that's, a big part of their life. And then me using it is an important part of my life. I get a lot of my life on this screen right here. It matters to me. And yet, despite the fact that we're both doing something that matters to us, that connects us in a way, we're very much separated from us. We're alienated. And so he claims that what capitalism does is move our attention from what's important to us as human beings and what's important in our relationships with other people to instead focus on stuff. The fancy term for this is commodity fetishism. So we start to, care about stuff more than people, right? And you've certainly heard these kind of thoughts about, people staring at their cell phones or whatever. Well, Marx would have been not surprised by that behavior at all, right? That's very much what he predicted, people caring more and more about what their material possessions are and not thinking about their relationships with other people. And of course, there's a whole industry, advertising, whose job it is to make us think that we need things, right? That's how they do well at their business, is by convincing us that we need this stuff, often to satisfy important human needs. So think about like beer commercials, for example. Beer is not great. It tastes kind of bad, and like being drunk is okay, but it's meh. But the thing that beer commercials sell you, if you think about it, is relationships between people, right? What do they show? They show groups of friends having fun together, laughing together, socializing, right? And what they're telling you is, if you buy our beer, then you will fulfill this need for human interaction, right? And so they're shifting your attention from fulfilling that actual need to buying the product. That idea actually far precedes Marx, but it's relevant here. Anyway, the last thing I want to say about capitalism is that it is, again, in the nature of capitalism, it's necessary to capitalism to expand, right? Think about that capitalist that I was at the beginning, right? I had my $100 worth of the means of production, and what did I want to do? I wanted to change it into more wealth, right? That's what every business person, everyone who owns a company wants to do, right? They want to expand their company. They want to make more money. And that's kind of what happens with capital, is it turns into more capital. And certainly, over the course of the past 200 years, that's absolutely what's happened. The amount of wealth that humanity has as a whole, ignore how it's distributed for a moment, has massively increased under capitalism, right? Far more than it did at any of the million years of human life before then. And there's some big consequences of this. One is that it's been absolutely devastating for the environment, right? Capitalism keeps expanding, keeps needing more and more resources. And this is what's, according to Marxists, at the root of our current environmental crisis. It also increases its concentration. So again, think about surplus value. What was going on there is some of the value of that human being's work was being transferred to the capitalists, right? So what we see over time is the rich people getting richer and richer, and poor people often getting very slowly richer, but the gap increasing hugely. Similarly, capitalism, under this explanation, is responsible for colonialism, which is what I'm going to talk about in the next video. But basically, what started in the UK and some European countries spread out to engulf the entire world, and capitalism, or almost the entire world, and capitalism is now the dominant system across the planet, largely as a result of colonialism, and there were lots of negative effects of that. And think about how much we value GDP growth, right? This is considered one of the most important things for any president, for any country, right? We kind of rank countries by how successful they are at growing their GDP. GDP means gross domestic product, meaning how much you're making, right? How much we're producing, how much stuff we're making. And right now, of course, America is in a panic because our GDP might slow down or fall as a result of the precautions we're taking against the global pandemic now. And this is seen as a real problem. And we're going to try and fix it as quickly as we can. In fact, Congress actually got Democrats and Republicans to agree on something. And the thing that ultimately they agreed on, right, is that we needed to avoid our GDP slowing down, right? Because capitalism demands growth. Okay, so that's a brief introduction to how capitalism works and some of the criticisms of it. And, broadly, I think there's a lot of important truth in Marx and in Marxist criticisms of capitalism. There's obviously problems with it as well, but I think these ideas are really worth considering seriously. Okay, so watch the John Green video about the pay gap, watch the video about inequality in America, in particular the perception of inequality, and then there's a video, it's largely not in English, but it has subtitles, where we see cocoa farmers on the Ivory Coast tasting chocolate for the first time. That's pretty fascinating. And then come back and watch the video on colonialism. I'll see you then. Thank you.